Two captains, two crises, two choices that shook the soul of Starfleet. One stood firm and said, "Not while I'm in command." The other compromised everything and whispered, "I can live with it." Star Trek has never been about easy answers. It's been about the cost of sticking to your ideals and the cost of abandoning them. In the Drumhead, Captain Picard defends the values of liberty, transparency, and due process, even when the enemy might be hiding in plain sight. In the Pale Moonlight, Captain Sisko lies, cheats, and enables assassination, all in the name of survival. Both episodes are masterpieces. Both arguments are valid. And that's exactly the point. This isn't about right and wrong. It's about what you would have done. It's about the Federation we think we believe in, and the one we hope we never have to become. Star Trek has always been political, not in the sense of party platforms or cable news, but in the way that all great science fiction is. It asks moral questions. It puts our values under pressure, and it imagines who we become when those values are tested. This franchise was built on contradictions. A peaceful organization that sometimes goes to war. A utopian society that still makes mistakes. An idealistic vision that wrestles with uncomfortable truths. And nowhere is that more clear than in these two episodes. The Drumhead and in the Pale Moonlight. Now before we begin, let's make something clear. When I say liberal or conservative, I don't mean political parties. I'm not here to wave banners or score points. I'm using these terms the way Star Trek uses them, to explore different moral worldviews. The Drumhead leans liberal because it defends civil liberties, due process, and warns against government overreach, even when lives are at stake. In the Pale Moonlight, leans conservative, not because it's partisan, but because it argues that survival may require compromise, secrecy, and morally gray action. This isn't a debate. It's a mirror. Each episode shows us what happens when fear collides with principle, and how good people respond. And if you find yourself agreeing with both, you're not confused. You're paying attention. So let's begin with the Federation on trial, an innocent man accused, and one captain standing alone against the tide. The USS Enterprise D suffers a minor explosion, an accident at first glance, but suspicion creeps in like a slow-moving shadow. Was it sabotage? Is there a spy aboard the flagship of the Federation? Starfleet dispatches a retired investigator, Admiral Nora Satie, once a legend for exposing conspiracies. With her arrival comes something far more dangerous than a saboteur, a hunger for certainty, born from fear. She begins with a Klingon officer, but the scope expands quickly. A young medical technician named Simon Tarsis becomes the next target. Not because of what he's done, but because of who he is. His grandfather was Romulan. He lied on his application. That's all it takes. The investigation becomes a tribunal, a stage, a purge disguised as patriotism. This is the Drumhead, and it's Star Trek's answer to the question, how do we protect ourselves without becoming the thing we fear? It's an episode deeply rooted in the politics of the 20th century. Inspired by McCarthyism, it aired in 1991, when America was still haunted by the Cold War and newly emboldened by its supposed victory. Fear of the enemy had shifted from an external threat to an internal one, and the Drumhead asked, what happens when fear turns inward? Admiral Satie is a terrifying figure, not because she's a villain, but because she's reasonable. At first, she speaks in the language of protection, of duty, of Federation values. But those values get warped Presumption replaces proof. Guilt replaces evidence. And fear becomes policy. What starts as an investigation becomes an inquisition. And Worf, so often the embodiment of Starfleet's idealistic strength, gets swept up in it. He doesn't see the danger at first. He supports her, until it's almost too late. Picard, in contrast, stands alone. He doesn't resist with force. He resists with conviction. He quotes Federation law. He appeals to reason. And he refuses to allow fear to dictate justice. His stand is not dramatic. It's not violent. But it is powerful. The road from legitimate suspicion to rampant paranoia is very much shorter than we think. In that moment, the Drumhead isn't just about Tarsus. It's about every time a government has overreached, every time loyalty was tested with accusations, every time fear was used as a weapon. This is a liberal argument, not in the partisan sense, but in the philosophical one. It champions civil liberties, due process, the rule of law. It warns against reactionary justice and moral certainty in a time of fear. And crucially, it believes that our ideals are stronger than the threats we face. That protecting them is more important than defending ourselves in the moment. And just to be clear, both liberals and conservatives value freedom, but they tend to emphasize different kinds. Liberal philosophy often focuses on civil liberties, freedom from government interference. Conservative thought often prioritizes order, tradition, and survival. Freedom through strength, stability, or moral responsibility. Neither view is inherently wrong. Star Trek gives us both. The episode says, "We don't sacrifice liberty for safety. We hold the line." But even here, Star Trek doesn't give us a perfect victory. Sati isn't arrested. Tarsus isn't publicly exonerated. The episode ends quietly. No celebration, no applause, just the sound of fear fading. And yet, the damage is done. Not to the ship, to the spirit of what Starfleet is supposed to be. The Drumhead shows us what happens when fear is allowed to wear the uniform of righteousness. When loyalty becomes surveillance, when patriotism becomes paranoia. It asks, what kind of federation are we defending if we abandon everything that made it worth saving? It begins with death. The weekly reports are getting worse. Casualty lists, starships lost, colonies destroyed. The war with the Dominion isn't just going badly, it's becoming unwinnable. And Captain Benjamin Sisko, the man who holds the line at Deep Space Nine, can feel the weight cracking his spine. He's not worried about winning battles anymore. He's worried about losing the war. So he does something Starfleet captains rarely do. He starts keeping a personal log, one that doesn't record events, but confesses his sins. He's speaking to himself, to history, and to whatever version of his soul still listens. This is In the Pale Moonlight, an episode that throws Starfleet's highest ideals into the fire and asks, can a lie be righteous? Can a good man live with a necessary evil? Sisko's plan is simple. He wants to bring the Romulans into the war. The Dominion has signed a non-aggression pact with them, and the Romulans, predictably, are watching, except they're just watching from the sidelines. But if they join the Federation-Klingon alliance, the war could turn. The problem? There's no way to convince them. So he decides to create a reason. Enter Garak, a tailor, a spy, a monster, a friend. Sisko turns to him not because he's trustworthy, but because he isn't. Because he'll do what needs to be done. because he already lives in the moral shadows Sisko has only just stepped into. Together, they orchestrate a forgery, an encoded message suggesting the Dominion plans to betray the Romulans. A secret meeting is arranged, false data is given to Senator Vreenak, and for a moment, it seems like the deception will work. Until Vreenak snarls the words, "It's a fake." That's when it happens. Vreenak's ship explodes, the Dominion is blamed, and the Romulans declare war on the Dominion, just as planned. Except, that wasn't the plan. Sisko confronts Garrick and learns the truth. The explosion was an assassination. The forgery was backed up with murder. And Garrick, cool as ever, tells Sisko what he doesn't want to admit. You needed someone to do the things you weren't willing to do. And he did them. This is not the Federation of Picard. This is not diplomacy, or reason, nor hope. This is survival at any cost. And the cost is Sisko's soul. He ends the episode with one of the most haunting monologues in Star Trek history. He knows what he did. He knows it was wrong. But he can live with it. And then he deletes the log. Unlike the Drumhead, there is no moral stand here. There's no impassioned speech, no quote from the Constitution, no dramatic confrontation with the enemy. There's only the quiet horror of a man realizing he has become something else, and deciding that's the price of victory. This is a conservative worldview, not in name, but in principle. It accepts that idealism may not be enough, that enemies who play dirty cannot be defeated by clean hands, that good men must sometimes do terrible things, so others don't have to. But here's what makes it truly Star Trek. It doesn't let Sisko off the hook. Yes, the plan worked. Yes, the war is now winnable. But Sisko is haunted, not heroic. The episode doesn't celebrate what he did. It interrogates it. It makes us sit in the discomfort with him. It refuses to clean the blood off his hands. And in doing so, it forces us to ask, if we had his responsibilities, would we have done it too? In the Pale Moonlight doesn't attack Federation values. It shows us what happens when those values aren't enough to stop an existential threat. It doesn't destroy Starfleet's image. It reveals the cost of maintaining that image. The hidden decisions, the moral compromises, the lies that protect the dream. Because in a war for survival, Starfleet may say, we come in peace. But sometimes, they come in shadows. So now we have our two pillars. One episode where a man holds the line and refuses to compromise. Another where a man breaks that line for what he believes is the greater good. Both are Starfleet. Both are Star Trek. And both are, in their own way, right. But they're not the same. Because In the Pale Moonlight doesn't just explore compromise, it explores the weight of responsibility. It doesn't say the end always justifies the means. It asks, what happens when they do? And you still have to live with yourself. Sisko isn't a villain. He's the kind of leader who carries the burden no one else wants to hold. He doesn't betray Starfleet. He protects it by becoming what others can't. That's not weakness. That's conviction under fire. The lie worked. The war changed. And one man made the call that no one else could. So let's place them side by side and see how one Federation produced two very different captains. At first glance, the Drumhead and In the Pale Moonlight couldn't be more different. One is a courtroom drama. The other, a war story. One defends idealism, the other submits to realism. But beneath the surface, these two episodes are reflections, two sides of the same federation, and two captains forced to answer the same question. What are you willing to do when fear becomes the enemy? So let's walk through them, moment by moment, and hold their choices up to the same light. In both stories, everything begins with a threat. On the Enterprise, it's a security breach, an explosion, a whisper of sabotage. In DS9, it's a mounting death toll, a war slipping away. Two captains, two threats, one internal, one external. But the fear is the same. The Federation is vulnerable, and something must be done. And that fear, that primal urge to act, is what sets everything in motion. Admiral Satie begins by rooting out enemies. Her words are calm, reasonable, patriotic. We're all under attack. Sisko begins with a goal: get the Romulans into the war, by any means necessary. If the Dominion continues to win, Earth will ultimately be next. Both use the same logic. The stakes are too high, the danger is too great. Inaction is surrender. And in that urgency, morality becomes flexible. Both captains have someone who pushes them forward, not necessarily out of malice, but because they believe in the mission. For Picard, it's Worf. Young, loyal, unquestioning. He supports the investigation out of duty. It isn't until the machinery turns on him that he realizes he's helped build it. For Sisko, it's Garak. Cynical, experienced, willing to cross lines others won't. To paraphrase him, that's why you came to me, isn't it? These characters serve the same function. They act when the captain hesitates. They do what the captain can't or won't. They reveal how thin the line really is between righteousness and ruthlessness. Both episodes involve a casualty. Not a strategic loss, a moral one. In the Drumhead, it's Simon Tarsus, a scared young man dragged into public shame because of his bloodline. Not his actions, his heritage. His rights are stripped in the name of vigilance. In the Pale Moonlight, it's Senator Vreenak. He's assassinated to make the lie convincing. One life exchanged for millions. One is collateral in a witch hunt. The other, collateral in a war. Both men are silenced to make a system function more smoothly. And in both cases, the end justifies the means, until it doesn't. This is where the two captains truly split. Picard confronts Admiral Satie in public. He quotes Starfleet's founding principles. He calls out the danger of paranoia wrapped in patriotism. He basically says, we cannot let fear erode the very foundation of our society. Sisko confronts Garak in private. There is no audience, no tribunal, no justice. Only quiet horror at what he's allowed to happen. Again, to paraphrase their conversation, Sisko would say, "You blew up that ship." And Garak responds, "That's the way you wanted it, Captain." Picard draws the line and refuses to cross it. Sisko crosses the line and is okay with it being buried. Both episodes end in silence. Picard and Worf walk away. No celebration, no vindication, just a moment of moral clarity. He defended the soul of the Federation, even if no one applauds. Sisko deletes his log, not because he's proud, but because he's ashamed. He did what was necessary. He saved the Alpha Quadrant, and he knows he can never undo it. And so we're left with two answers. Picard says, our values must hold, especially in crisis. If we sacrifice liberty in the name of security, we lose both. Sisko says, sometimes the price of survival is too high to pay with idealism. If the dream dies with us, what good was it? Both are right. And that's why Star Trek is still worth watching. Because it doesn't pick sides. It holds up a mirror and says, you choose. You decide. What kind of captain would you be? In the 24th century, there are no perfect answers. Only choices, consequences, and captains who must live with both. Because the Federation isn't one philosophy. It's a contradiction, a debate, a dream. One that must be defended, sometimes with a speech, and sometimes with a lie. Let's talk about the captains. Because as much as the Drumhead and In the Pale Moonlight are about ethics and politics, they are just as much about leadership. Not Starfleet in theory, Starfleet in practice. One man at a time, one decision at a time. And in these two episodes, we don't just see two responses to fear. We see two fundamentally different styles of command. Jean-Luc Picard leads with principle. He believes that leadership is about example, not expedience. That the captain's chair is a moral compass, not a war room. In the Drumhead, he never yells. He doesn't grandstand. He simply refuses to abandon the ideals that define him. His strength lies in calm conviction. He doesn't need to control the courtroom. He recenters it. He doesn't crush Admiral Satie. He lets her expose herself. Ultimately, his message is, we must not allow fear to destroy who we are. That's Picard's command philosophy. His power comes from restraint, and in moments of chaos, he anchors the people around him. Benjamin Sisko is different. He was forged in tragedy. He lost his wife at Wolf 359. He commands a space station on the frontier. He's not building utopia. He's defending it. Sisko doesn't want to lie. He doesn't want to enable an assassination. But he will, if it means protecting the Federation from annihilation. Remember, he does say, I lied. I cheated. I bribed men to cover the crimes of other men. He doesn't deny it, but he doesn't celebrate it either. He carries it, like a soldier with a wound that never heals. His leadership is marked by weight. He makes impossible decisions, not because he's lost faith in Starfleet, but because he knows the price of losing. Both captains serve the same Starfleet. They wear the same uniform, but they interpret the Federation's values through very different lenses. For Picard, values are absolute. For Sisko, values are tools. Picard believes in never compromising. Sisko believes in knowing when to compromise and how far you're willing to go. Neither man is weak. Neither man is naive. They carry the burden of command in opposite ways. One shields the dream. The other preserves it, even if it means getting his hands dirty. Context matters too, though. Picard is in a time of peace. He has the luxury to hold the line. The threat is internal, philosophical. His challenge is to resist fear itself. Sisko is in a time of war. His station is under threat. His allies are dying, and the Federation may not survive. His challenge is to win without losing who he is. You can't take the Drumhead and drop it into the Dominion War. And you can't ask Sisko to solve a political witch hunt with the same calm confidence Picard used on the Enterprise. These aren't just two captains. They're two eras. Two chapters of Federation history told through men who bore the burden. And here's the heart of it. You don't have to choose between Picard and Sisko. You can admire both, because both are acting out of love for the Federation, just in different ways. Picard defends its soul. Sisko defends its survival. One reminds us who we are. The other ensures we live long enough to remember. That's what makes Star Trek honest. It doesn't pretend morality is always easy. It just says it's always worth wrestling with. So let me ask this. What kind of leader would you be? The kind who refuses to break the rules, even if it means defeat, or the kind who breaks the rules to save the lives of millions? There's really not an easy answer. There never was. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. As I've discussed, in the Drumhead, we see what happens when fear turns inward. In the Pale Moonlight, we see what happens when fear comes from beyond the stars. Two crises, two responses, and two completely different kinds of truth. But here's the real point. Both arguments matter. Picard reminds us of who we want to be. Sisko shows us what we might have to become. And if you erase either one, you don't get Star Trek. You get a fantasy, or a tragedy, or Warhammer 40k. Because a Federation that only follows Picard's path, it may fall the moment the enemy refuses to play by the same rules. But a Federation that only follows Sisko's path, it may survive the war, but forget why it fought in the first place. Starfleet exists between those two poles. Not perfection, not corruption, but balance. The hard kind. The kind that never feels satisfying, but always feels real. This is what separates Star Trek from almost every other science fiction franchise. It doesn't pick one worldview and write it into the stars. It doesn't say, only the idealist is right. Or, only the realist survives. It says, here's the debate. Lay it out. It gives us Picard and Sisko, not to force a choice, but to show that leadership, morality, and courage all exist in tension. Because sometimes upholding your values is the fight. And sometimes, protecting lives means doing what your values forbid. If all of this sounds familiar, it should. Because we live in a world where some people think defending liberty means holding the line at all costs. And others think defending the nation means doing what must be done, even if it's ugly. Both sides fear destruction, just from different sources. One fears internal decay. The other, external annihilation. And Star Trek doesn't preach at either of them. It holds up a mirror, the one that I continually talk about here, and it says, you're both afraid. Now what are you going to do about it? And that's why both the Drumhead and, in the Pale Moonlight, endure. Because they aren't just about threats. They're about how people respond when everything is on the line, and what they're willing to trade to protect what they love. In the end, the Federation survives because of people like Picard, who never let go of its ideals, and because of people like Sisko, who protect the people behind those ideals, even when it hurts. We need both. We've always needed both. One protects the meaning, the other protects the people. A society without Picard becomes authoritarian. A society without Sisko becomes naive. Only together do they really form something worth fighting for. So when someone says Star Trek is too idealistic, show them Sisko. And when someone says the Federation is just another empire, show them Picard. Because this franchise was never about picking a side. It was about asking, what would you do if it were your uniform, your war, your conscience? And would you live with it? Some episodes of Star Trek fade. They're good, entertaining, but self-contained. Others become something more. The Drumhead and In the Pale Moonlight didn't just entertain. They left scars. They created fractures in the fandom, productive ones. The kind that force viewers to ask not just what happened, but what should have happened. That's the sign of a great story. It refuses to die because the conversation around it never ends. The Drumhead continues to be cited anytime democracy feels fragile. When due process is ignored, when guilt is assumed, when patriotism becomes performance. Picard's warning about fear and paranoia eroding liberty has been quoted in editorials and comment sections across the political spectrum. His speech remains one of Star Trek's most widely referenced moments in political discourse. It has been used in classrooms. It has definitively been used in debates. And most importantly, it still makes people uncomfortable, because it reminds us that the worst things done in the name of justice often come wearing a badge. But if the Drumhead is a warning, In the Pale Moonlight is a confession. In the Pale Moonlight is frequently referenced in think pieces, political science discussions, and online debates about intelligence leak ethics, wartime deception, and controversial foreign policy choices. It's been used to justify morally gray actions, and to condemn them. Some viewers see Sisko as a hero who saved the Federation. Others see a man who proved the Federation isn't as noble as it pretends to be. And that's the point. This isn't an episode that tells you how to feel. It asks if you can sleep at night after making the hard choice. It's not about winning the war. It's about what winning costs you. These two episodes created two kinds of fans. The ones who see the Drumhead as the gold standard of what Star Trek should always be. Idealistic, lawful, principled. And the ones who see In the Pale Moonlight as the most honest moment in the franchise. Raw, human, and necessary. But if you're listening closely, you'll realize they're not really at odds. They're in conversation. Because neither episode claims to hold the only truth. They just force you to take a look at yourself. And if Star Trek is supposed to be a reflection of who we are and who we could become, then both episodes serve the mission. One shows the Federation at its best. The other, at its most vulnerable. One guards the soul. The other guards the body. And together, they keep the dream alive. In recent years, newer Star Trek series have wrestled with this legacy. Some fans feel the modern Trek leans too far into the Sisko model. Gritty, broken, compromised. Others argue it lost the clarity of Picard's moral high ground and replaced it with ambiguity without purpose. But the Drumhead and In the Pale Moonlight prove that it's not about choosing one or the other. It's about earning the contrast. Sisko's darkness is powerful because we remember Picard's light. Picard's light has weight because we've seen how much darkness there is to hold back. The strength of Star Trek has never come from telling one kind of story. It comes from telling both, and trusting the audience to wrestle with the tension. There's a reason these two episodes keep showing up in rankings, retrospectives, and arguments. Not because they offer comfort, but because they don't. They're reminders that even in a utopia, morality isn't automatic. That in the future, we still face hard choices. And that Star Trek isn't perfect because its characters are flawless. It's perfect because they're honest. The Drumhead shows us how close we are to becoming tyrants. In the Pale Moonlight shows us how far we're willing to go to stop them. So when someone asks which episode is better, just don't answer. Ask them who they were the last time they watched. Because the older you get, the more these stories change. And not because they shift, but because you do. If you've made it this far, then maybe it's time I told you something. When I started writing this video, I told myself I'd be neutral. That I'd weigh both episodes, both captains, both philosophies. But the truth is, I know where I stand. I admire Picard. I believe in truth, in justice, in rules. I believe people should be free to be who they are, whoever that is. That they should be able to live their best lives on their terms without shame or fear. And I believe deeply that those freedoms have to be protected equally, fairly, without cutting corners. But I also know myself. And if someone threatens my family, my community, my way of life, or, to a limited degree, even my values, all bets are off. That's why I've always felt closer to Sisko, because I think he represents something real, something uncomfortable. That quiet voice that says, I'll play by the rules until the rules no longer protect the people I love. Not because I want to cheat, not because I want to lie, not because I know what it feels like to carry something and know you're the only one who can. There's a cost to that, and Sisko pays it. That doesn't make him lesser than Picard. It just makes him someone else. I don't think Sisko wanted to be that man. I know that I do not want to be that man either. But I also think a world full of Picards needs someone willing to be a Sisko when the time comes. Someone who can make the hard call. Not because they don't believe in the dream, but because they believe in it so much they'll do anything to protect it. Even if it means carrying the burden so others don't have to. That's not clean, it's not noble, and it's definitely not easy to explain. But I think that's the point. Star Trek never promised that the future would be easy. It just promised that it was worth striving for. And sometimes, striving for it means making choices that hurt. Choices that you don't want to make. But do anyway, because someone has to. So maybe the final question isn't, who was right? Maybe it's, who would you have been? Picard, holding the line. Sisko, crossing it for everyone else. Or maybe someone in between. And maybe that answer changes, depending on the day, or the decade, or the life you've lived. That's why these stories last, because they don't judge you. They just ask you to look inside and live with what you find.